Hello and welcome to another fantastic episode of Cracking the Rich Code, the podcast. I'm your host, John Verico, and I've got with me again another fantastic, intriguing guest from the Cracking the Rich Code community. I have to tell you, I love doing this show because I get to meet so many fantastic people. And through not only through the doing the podcast, but also just part of the Cracking the Rich Code community itself. This next guest and I met through the Cracking the Rich Code mastermind, and her chapter is in volume 19, which just came out. And as of this, I know this is an evergreen podcast, so if you're watching it, the book is already out. You want to look for it. But my guest today is Karen Casanovas, who's kind of fascinating. She's a certified resilience coach, author, and speaker, and she helps people navigate through major traumatic upheavals in their life. Some of her experience comes from surviving a 9.2 magnitude earthquake, and I can't wait to talk to her more about that, kind of the lessons learned from that and how she uses that to help clients nowadays. So let's bring in Karen Casanovas. Sorry.
Hi,
Karen,
John.
how are you
Hi,
doing
John.
today?
I'm great. Hi, everybody.
It's great. I don't see any earthquakes going on because your image is stable. No, I'm joking. You're in
Good.
Alaska, is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And it was just a balmy 6 above yesterday.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's been chilly. We've had a pretty mild winter overall, though. So nothing like the East Coast or the South.
Isn't that bizarre to think of that, right? It was actually colder here in Pennsylvania than it was there. We went through a couple of weeks of steady temperatures in the teens and single digits, and several days of the below zero temperatures.
Uh,
With a lot of snow that was sitting out there and frozen and kind of locked up. So it was pretty
mhm.
interesting here for a while.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Well, we didn't come together to talk about the weather. We came to talk about you and your expertise and what you do and what you wrote about in the Cracking the Rich Code book, volume 19. And your chapter is Facing the Storm, Building Resilience Through Motivation, Agility, and Perseverance. So we're going to get into that a little bit, but I have to go back to this just because it's so intriguing. You survived a 9.2 magnitude earthquake. What was that even like?
I was 8 years old and had just come back from a birthday party and just returned home. And my brother was watching TV. And so I sat down there for a few minutes. We heard our mom in the kitchen. She was cooking. I remember this mashed potatoes is what she was fixing. And all of a sudden, everything started shaking. And I didn't know. My brother didn't know. He was only 4 what was happening. My mother immediately knew. She was calm. She just grabbed us and we got underneath the dining room table. She pulls down the tablecloth and she was very calm, very calm.
Wow.
And we lasted through that, 4 minutes and 38 seconds. And, she wasn't screaming. She was just protecting us and kept us very safe.
Wow. Did you have a lot of damage in your particular home
Oh,
or?
yes. I mean, things had flown out of the cabinets and there was food everywhere. And fortunately, no glass breaking. We did have exterior. We had a huge crack in our driveway that I remember extended from the street to our house.
Oof.
And that was pretty significant. And then that evening, because we had continued to have aftershocks, we were evacuated by the fire department. And they brought us blankets, but then we had to leave. There was an expected tsunami because it was such a significant magnitude that they were afraid, and eventually in some parts of Alaska, actually, that did happen.
Wow. You know, being an East Coast guy, I'd never really experienced, much of earthquakes. And there was a tiny one that happened in New Jersey when I was a kid, and none of us knew what it was at the time. It was just, this crazy rumble, scary thing, and it turned out to be several miles away, and a sinkhole had opened up in a local park. That was then. And then many, many years later, living in Washington, D.C., I'm in my office, and my secretary, who she had just returned to work after having suffered a stroke.
Mm.
And so she's standing there talking to me, and we're actually talking about how she was doing. And all of a sudden she goes, woo, and grabs the chair, and the whole, there's this whole big woof going on. And
Mhm.
she thought she was having another stroke.
Oh my.
And I assured her that it wasn't her unless it was contagious, because
Mhm.
the whole building had just wobbled. We were on the 10th floor of that building, and that was the earthquake of 2011. Fortunately, not a lot of physical damage in Washington, D.C. There were some structures that got damaged, but it was a minor earthquake in this big scheme of things. And we
Sure.
wound up with the damage we had was we did have a pool in that house. We didn't put it in. We didn't make that expense. It just happened to be there when we bought the house. But the pool cracked,
Yeah.
and so that was interesting time. But that was my only experience with earthquakes. And then to hear something, I think that was like a magnitude 4 or 5 or something. To think of a 9 is
Mhm.
just
It,
traumatic.
it is. And, similar to what you described, it is a little bit of that rolling. I mean, I remember the noise was so loud. It was like a out of balance washer. And so you hear
Oh,
this thumping and, just this noise of things breaking. And, I mean, you couldn't really, I mean, I didn't know at 8 years old what exactly was happening and structurally what was happening around us, but you could hear things. And I remember years later when my grandmother had been with us during another earthquake, she goes, it sounded like a truck hit the building. I mean, it's very noisy and you hear the ground and everything sort of churning
oof.
underneath you. It is a very, very interesting sensation. My brother to this day gets a little bit unnerved because he was so young. He couldn't
Sure.
really put his mind around what was happening. Even just a few years older, at least I could somewhat make sense of it. And just the fact my mother was so calm, and then my dad comes rushing through the
That's
door,
helpful.
and we were all, whew, we were all together, and that was great.
Yeah. You know, these kinds of things, though, they do leave uh, sometimes traumatic scars in us,
Hmm.
and so we become so sensitive to these things that could completely disrupt our lives. And those, you never know what that's going to be. It could be, a traumatic diagnosis
Hmm.
of an illness. It could be, just all kinds of things. You can lose a job. There are all kinds of crazy things that can happen to us in our life, and depending on our experiences and how we deal with things when they go awry or when something traumatic really happens. And this is where your expertise comes in, and that you have worked on to help people to overcome these traumatic changes that could happen in their life. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's get on the real track of conversation here, and not just about earthquakes, but kind of, what happens to people when they experience some sort of traumatic change, and how they can be helped to not have these scars that impact them for the rest of their life.
Hmm. And so much of it certainly is mindset. And that is what really served me very well during that particular earthquake and that traumatic situation was the fact that, I call it, this seismic shift did happen. Instead of me being frightened and fearful and going forward with any kind of childhood trauma where it was such an impactful situation and I never really got through it, because of the support system around me, my family, because of the positivity, and because of the outreach as a family and community that we did. Those were key factors in helping me as I go through life and went through, my younger years of handling challenges and any obstacle that may come my way. It is, first of all, getting yourself into that positive mindset. And that's where I talk about the first, piece of sort of this seismic shift formula that I've developed. You have to be self motivated, you have to be self aware of where you are. But, the motivation to move forward and not be stuck in that medical diagnosis, in that job loss, in that relationship that has now been severed. There can be so many things, and even a medical diagnosis where you have just recently recovered from surgery. You can get yourself in a place where you are frustrated, you're angry, you want to get better, and you are really stuck. So the motivation to sort of help yourself, get through that is really important. And I kind of also lean into a few steps. So in the instance of a medical situation, let's say you were walking here in Alaska. A lot of people walk and they fall on the ice, and they might break their they might break their wrist or fall and twist their ankle. So first of all, one other piece of advice is, all right, well, let's look at the facts. Don't over dramatize what's happened, but I fell, I had surgery, I'm okay. The next piece of it is look at, okay, how can I digest what's happened without placing blame on anyone? Well, accidents happen. It happened to me. I missed a little work, but I'm okay. And then the third piece of it is reframing, okay, well, what can I learn from this, or how could I positively move forward? I'm going to physical therapy, and I was able to be paid for work because I worked a few hours at home, and I'm getting better. And then that last piece where people really, really, it's tough. You get, again, you get impatient. So the last piece is give it time, be patient, and just go with the flow of how you are on that particular day. And again, the self-talk there comes into play. I'm going to get better. It may be months, but I'm recovering.
Now, what happens when, let's say, it's something more, a more permanent change? Like,
Hmm.
let's say you wound up losing that leg.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that is a whole different, now a new world you have to adopt to. How can people uh, keep that positive mindset going when they have something that looks like, a really traumatic, permanent change to their life?
Hmm. I would say that is where this agility, the second part of my framework, really comes into play. You have to be not only adaptable to what occurs to you on the inside in your mindset, but internally and externally. Studies have shown if you're depending upon the support system and people to cheer you on and say, John, you're going to be okay. We know you've lost your leg, but you're going to be okay. Well, that can help, but only to a point. We have to rely on both internal and external forces to
Nice.
drive us going forward. But that's where I would say certainly support systems like therapists can help, and other occupational therapists help us with the physicality of it. And then again, I would say, the support system does come into play, but you also have to be very, very, very motivated. And that's the third part, the perseverance. You just have to look at your goals. What do you want the outcome to be? Do you want to wallow in this place of despair for the rest of your life? Or do you want to move forward? So that's where the choice comes in.
Right.
And you're right, not every day is going to be positive, but I have a tool, that I give to people. In fact, one of my friends just had knee replacement surgery, and I sent it to them last night. What does your day look like today? What can you do today because you're feeling quite energetic? What can you do today where you're accomplishing something and you feel pretty good? On those days you don't feel as motivated, what are some lower energy tasks you can do on those days? So again, it's knowing where you're at, assessing what your ability is on that day, and then moving forward, even if it's just to do one thing and accomplish one item that day. That's moving you forward.
I like that. I like that. And it's so you bring out a really critical point when you talk about, we have choices, and then if you're having a bad day and you're not able to do a lot that day, instead of beating yourself up over it,
Hmm.
take the win for what you can do,
Right.
and then do more, when you can. And it is really all about our internal mindset. And you bring that out really, really well when you talk about our motivation and being, and the agility and perseverance. You mentioned about uh, wallowing in the loss. I actually wrote, not that it's not about me, but I wrote a quote recently in a book of quotes about resilience, and my quote was, "Sometimes life will deal you crap,
Yeah.
and you have the choice. You can be the victim and wallow in the stench, or you can turn it into fertilizer. You can turn it into fertilizer for future growth."
Absolutely. We must take, although it's difficult, I'm not saying that it's not
No.
challenging. I'm not saying that it's easy, but we must take those situations and, is question, to ask yourself, is there a lesson here? Should I have done X, Y, and Z? Maybe yes, maybe no, but at least looking at the situation, and I always call it zoom out, to the 30,000
Mhm.
foot level. Zoom out and just look at yourself and say, okay, what happened here? Again, going back to what are the facts without placing blame? Can you reframe it, and what can you do moving forward? And it is really tough. I mean, I had many days when I've had surgery and you don't want to do anything and you're really mad, you're in a lot of pain, and this can really cross across to when you have lost a loved one and you
Mhm.
are grieving, and that pain is so deep, and you really miss them and you want to talk to them and you just want to have one last conversation, but you can't. What can you do? Well, the small thing is, in a grief situation, you can reflect on a happy memory, just one memory that you have that you will hold so dear for the rest of your life. And then, take those bad days as they come, because they will come, whether it's a medical situation, a clinical diagnosis, or a relationship or job ending. That grief of any of those events can be so profound in our lives. And sometimes it does change us. It changes us maybe to be more empathetic. It can change us to be more understanding of the plight that caregivers have. So those are the lessons that we can take that might be positive, even though you have a very, very painful situation that you're currently experiencing.
And sometimes the changes that happen to us aren't necessarily traumatic in nature, or didn't happen um, to us. I mean, just
Mhm.
it could be. I've worked with veterans and first responders and things like that who have retired, and so now their life has changed, their purpose has changed, and sometimes they go through a period of, I feel useless. I don't know what to do now. And so how we evolve to whatever that new norm is going to be is so critical for
Mhm.
how we do going forward. And so, everybody, in case you're tuning in late for some goofy reason, go back and listen to this from the beginning. Karen Casanovas has some absolutely intriguing and fabulous advice for dealing with major trauma and upheavals in your life. And she wrote about that in Cracking the Rich Code, Volume 19, which has come out recently as of this recording. And her chapter is Facing the Storm, Building Resilience Through Motivation, Agility, and Perseverance. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that now. Karen, why don't you describe a little bit for us what you wrote about? And we kind of touching on it here a bit, but what are the points that you wanted people to get from reading your chapter? What is the real big takeaways that you want people? What are those aha moments that you want them to get from this?
Mhm. I would say that when you look at going through a shock, a disruption in your life of any kind, first, again, feel the feelings, like understand what I am
That's
feeling.
important.
Fear.
Yeah.
What I am under, what I am feeling right now is I don't know where to turn. So you have that feeling of uncontrollable angst. So understand that those feelings are real, they're valid, and feel them. It's really important that you not dismiss them, because that will, unfortunately, the body remembers, and therefore it likely will catch up with you at some point down the road, whether it's 5 months, 5 years, or 15 years from now. Something will happen and you will be forced to be pushed back into that space of that event that happened, and you'll
Right.
eventually have to deal with it anyway. So feel the feelings. I think that that's one thing.
That is so critical to acknowledge them.
Right, to acknowledge them and just understand that any personal challenge you face, whether it's on an everyday basis or something that has really shaken you, and again, it can be shock, whether it's in our world, we're observing, just as you were saying, it could be something that you have observed. Um, that also can shake people up. I unfortunately had a personal situation where I was sitting in a car at an intersection, and a truck ran the red light just as the motorcyclist was turning.
Ooh.
And, the sound of the truck hitting the motorcyclist, who instantly was killed, I will never forget that. Every time I drive by that intersection, I will never forget that. That shock of what I witnessed is something that will impact me, for many reasons, right? I think of being safe. I think of not running red lights. I think of being, extremely conscious of other drivers who may be entering traffic lanes when I'm driving. So, again, feel the feelings, understand what you observed, what had happened, and then you need to engage yourself, your body, your brain, and say, okay, now what can I do? So maybe it's something, some physical activity. Maybe you journal. Maybe you talk to someone about it. Maybe you share the story with family members. It could be going to counseling or some sort of therapy that works for you. If you are a religious person, there's also members in your religious family that can probably help you through it. Um, Music is a good one. Dancing is something that has lately been proven to help with the mind and the brain connection and the body,
Absolutely.
and how it soothes you. So look for those things once you have determined what you're feeling, where you're at, what can you do, then take action to do something that will improve your situation mentally, physically, help your body. Yesterday was a good example. I was sort of thinking, oh gosh, it's nice out. I haven't been outside very much, and I've been doing a lot of work. And I said, I'm just going to go outdoors. Out in nature is one of the best things also that we can
Hmm.
do, and just breathe the air and the freshness of the space. That sometimes also can cause a shift, and this is really what I'm speaking about, is what I call it, because of my earthquake experience, seismic shift. What can you do that takes you out of one space and then plants you in another place where you can move forward, and then again keep going, keep going, keep going forward, even if
Yeah.
it is one small step at a time.
I love it. This is such great advice, and it's just great perspective. And talk about going outside in that balmy -4. Is that what it was?
Yeah, I think today it's 17 degrees above. So hey,
Practically a heat wave. I love
it
it.
is, it's warmed up. And one other thing I just wanted to mention, when you were talking about retirement, that's another place where people can really, they feel lost, they don't have a purpose anymore. And often, especially with law enforcement, I have personal alliances to law enforcement, as 6 members of my family have been in law enforcement.
Wow.
So whether you have been in any type of job where you are retired, I know one particular police officer, when you talk about first responders, he was able to just not have any feelings, didn't get into deep in the weeds of the emotion of what he saw every day and what he had to take care of and how he had to deal with it personally to survive. But the moment he retired, he started having nightmares every
Yeah.
day.
All that came
And
back.
it all came back. So again,
But, you know,
when those
you're
things happen,
during when you're dealing with that on a day-to-day basis, you kind of
mm-hmm,
put that protective shell and repress that stuff.
absolutely.
Then when you don't have to deal with it anymore, then all of a sudden, like, that wall comes down.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I was reading an interesting story related to the Olympics yesterday. I was reading about Eric Heiden, who was the speed skater. And once he retired from speed skating, he became a cyclist, but he eventually became a doctor. And he deals with sports injuries. And his particular
Brilliant.
practice now is also helping those at the Olympics with sports injuries as they're facing them. But again, that requires, again, a different kind of resilience, resilience, of course. But these are premier athletes at the top of their game, more than we could ever know that dedication and what it does to your life and how it really takes over your life. And you do absolutely nothing but train and focus. And as I have been watching the Olympics, it just reminds me again the amount of um, that tenacity and that
Yes.
fortitude it takes to perform um, athletics at that particular level is really, really amazing. And so then now, Eric Heiden having his own experience being at that level, and then now being a doctor, I'm sure he's not only fixing them, physically, but mentally he must certainly be able to assist them also.
Well, that's just it. I mean, he's experienced it. He knows what it's like, and he knows when that is the core of your life. Is that is what you're doing, is that physicality of every single day, and then all of a sudden you find yourself unable to do something at the level that you were used to doing it no matter what reason. That's that. Ooh, man, it's a reminder,
Hmm.
that maybe that's not everything in the world.
Hmm. Right.
But not to also not to beat yourself up if you have to change gears. Sometimes it's temporary. Sometimes it's an easy to overcome type of injury. Sometimes it's something significantly more significant. I mean,
Right.
I've known
Right. Well,
people who were professional baseball players, and they got injured, and then they next thing you know, they're
mhm.
having an office job,
Right.
and
Right. Or
it can be
then
traumatic.
they happen. Yeah. Or they have an addiction, right? Because they are substituting that high,
Yeah,
that
that's
dopamine
true.
for something else that gives them that same feeling without dealing with the pain that they have suffered or that change. I look at it like, an origin story. For instance, uh, when a person gets married, you have this story of things are going to be great. Well, for some couples, that story doesn't end up to be the same origin story.
Right.
So it can be a divorce, and you now have to write a new story. I look at it like a permanent disability, such as an amputation, as you mentioned earlier, same way. This wasn't the story. This wasn't the life that I thought I was going to have, but this is my life now. So, how can I write a new story
A new
that
chapter,
still will
yes.
be kneeling for me, but it's going to be different? Eh,
The important thing I think to remember in all of this is that no matter what, you still matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can still make a difference in the world in whatever way that you can. Your life is still important,
Mhm.
and whatever limitations or whatever changes have happened have opened a new door to start a new chapter. And
Mhm.
speaking of chapters, I'll remind people to read your chapter in Cracking the Rich Code, Volume 19, which is Facing the Storm, Building Resilience Through Motivation, Agility, and Perseverance. I can't believe that we're out of time already, Karen. These things go so fast. Um, we could have talked, for hours on these topics, and I know that you're out there helping people through these traumatic changes in their life, and we're so grateful for the fact that you're out there doing that.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. And,
So
I
go ahead.
think just in conclusion, it's just really finding tools and strategies that work for you in your situation, whether it be writing, speaking to others about your situation, whether it be doing something physical. You need to find the right tools that work for you on the days where you have a lot of energy and things are going great. You need to find some sort of other tools and strategies on the days where things are not well. You might consider them failing. Again, remember, most of these situations are temporary. And then what can push you? What can pull you? What can propel you into a different place so you don't stay stuck and in that mindset and in that physical, often really kind of desperate situation? What can help you? Again, that motivation you need, the agility to adapt, and the perseverance of keeping going.
I love it. Thank you so much, Karen. We had this fantastic conversation with Karen Casanovas. If you want to learn more about Karen, go to karencasanovas.com and read her chapter in Cracking the Rich Code, Volume 19. We've mentioned it a few times now, but also reach out and connect with Karen. She's very responsive if you connect with her on LinkedIn. So look for Karen Casanovas on LinkedIn and watch this episode a couple of times because you're going to find all these great golden nuggets within the conversation. Karen, thank you again for joining us today. It's been a wonderful conversation. Look forward to chatting with you again in the future as we continue to stay connected. But in the meantime, everyone, thanks for listening, and check out the next episode of Cracking the Rich Code with whoever our guest will be next. Take care
Thanks.
and have a great day. Thank you, Karen.